Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a closet that changed everything. A decade when hemlines rose, colours got louder, and the quiet rules your mother followed simply stopped applying. We're talking about the fashion revolution that changed what every 1960s American woman wore. Before we get into it, a genuine thank you to the viewer who asked for this one. Your ideas keep shaping where this channel goes, and I never take that for granted. If you are new here, a gentle like or a comment helps more than you know, and if you would rather listen than watch, the channel is now on Spotify too. The link is tucked in the description whenever you want it. Now go ahead and get settled. Dim the lights if you have not already. Let the fan hum in the background. Pull the blanket up. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. What did it actually feel like to stand in a department store fitting room in 1965, watching the hemline creep higher than your mother would ever allow? What did the fabric counter smell like? All that new synthetic brightness next to the wool your grandmother swore by. What did it feel like the first time you saw a woman on the street in a colour no one's mother would have worn to church? And just like that, it is 1963. The radio in the next room is playing something with a little more rhythm than usual. Somewhere down the hall, a sewing machine has gone quiet for the first time in years. The day is just beginning, and so, quietly, is the revolution. Let's start with the window. You're walking past it the way you always do, coffee in hand, coat buttoned against the morning chill, and something makes you stop. The mannequin is not wearing what mannequins wore last year. The skirt sits higher. The colour is not the soft beige or dutiful navy you grew up with. It is something closer to orange, something that seems to shout a little, even standing still. You set your coffee down on the ledge beside the glass without quite deciding to, the way you might pause to watch a parade pass. Behind you, the street carries on, as it always does, a bus sighing to a stop at the corner, someone's heels clicking briskly on the pavement, the smell of exhaust mixing faintly with the bakery 2 doors down, where the morning batch of rolls is just coming out of the oven. But the window holds your attention the way very little has lately, the way a held breath holds itself before it has to let go. You notice the details the longer you look. The hem sits well above the knee, higher than anything you have owned, higher than anything you would have imagined owning a year ago. The fabric catches the morning light in a way that feels almost too bold for 8 in the morning, too bold for a Tuesday, too bold for the version of yourself that left the house 20 minutes earlier in a coat the colour of oatmeal. The mannequin's posture is different too. Hip cocked slightly, chin lifted, as if daring you to look away first. Even the shoes at its feet look unfamiliar, flatter than what you're used to, almost boyish, paired with the dress in a way that seems to contradict everything you were taught about matching properly. A woman beside you, a stranger, lingers at the glass too, and for a moment neither of you says anything. Just 2 people caught by the same small shock of colour. She murmurs something under her breath, not quite disapproval, not quite delight, something in between. The sound people make when the world quietly rearranges itself in front of them. You glance at her sideways, and she glances back, and there is a small, shared understanding that passes between you, wordless. The way understanding sometimes travels faster than speech. She adjusts her handbag on her shoulder and after a moment steps closer to the glass rather than away from it, as though deciding, right there on the sidewalk, that curiosity has won out over caution. You think of your mother's closet, the careful rows of practical dresses, the muted palette she has worn faithfully for as long as you can remember. You think of how she would react to this window, to this shade of orange, to a hemline that ends where this one ends. You suspect she would look away first and comment on it later. the way she comments on most things she does not yet understand, tucking her opinion away for a quieter moment when she could deliver it without an audience, perhaps over Sunday dinner, perhaps in the car on the way home from somewhere else entirely. Inside the store, through the glass, you can see the floor manager rearranging a display nearby, glancing occasionally toward the window as though checking that the mannequin is still drawing the attention he clearly hoped it would. He straightens a stack of folded scarves, then looks up again, catching your eye through the glass for just a moment before returning to his task with the satisfied air of a man whose gamble is paying off exactly as planned. A young sales clerk pauses to watch you both from just inside the door, curious, perhaps a little pleased, the way anyone might be pleased to see their gamble paying off in real time on the sidewalk, a small silent proof that the buyers upstairs had read the moment correctly. You find yourself doing the small mental arithmetic that comes before any purchase, wondering what occasion might justify a dress like that, wondering if there even needs to be an occasion at all anymore, or if simply wanting it is reason enough now. It is a strange kind of math, one your mother's generation never had to do, when clothing existed to serve a purpose rather than simply to be wanted, when every purchase had to answer to some practical need before it was allowed onto a hanger in the first place. You linger a moment longer than you mean to. There is something almost thrilling in standing on a familiar street corner and feeling, for just a few seconds, like the ground beneath fashion itself has shifted overnight, like the whole rulebook has been quietly rewritten while everyone was busy with breakfast and school lunches and the ordinary business of getting through a Tuesday. It is the kind of quiet revolution that never announces itself with headlines, only with hemlines, only with a single colour in a single window, catching a single person's eye at exactly the right moment, spreading not through decree but through glances like yours, multiplied 1,000 times over on 1,000 other sidewalks. You pick your coffee back up, now lukewarm, and continue on toward work, but you find yourself glancing back over your shoulder once, twice, as though checking the window is still real, as though it might have been some trick of the morning light rather than an actual dress on an actual mannequin behind actual glass. The bus that passed earlier has long since gone. The bakery smell has faded behind you. But the orange of that dress stays with you the whole way to the office, bright and stubborn against the grey of your own coat. By the time you reach the office, the image has settled somewhere in the back of your mind. Quiet but persistent. The kind of thing you will find yourself thinking about again at lunch, and again on the walk home, and again that evening while you stand in front of your own closet, wondering, for the first time in longer than you can say, whether the woman you have always dressed as is still the only woman you're allowed to be. You will open the closet door slowly, the way you always do, and look at the same rows of familiar dresses and think, just for a moment, about orange. It is the kind of quiet moment that changes nothing on its own, and yet somehow changes everything that comes after it. You will pass that window again tomorrow and the day after, and each time it will feel a little less shocking, a little more familiar, until one morning you will walk past it without stopping at all, not because it no longer catches your eye, but because by then you will already own something just like it, tucked quietly into the back of your own closet, waiting for its turn to be worn. It is Sunday afternoon now, and you're standing in your mother's bedroom doorway, watching her get ready for a luncheon. Her closet smells like cedar and the same perfume she has worn since before you were born. Everything inside it is careful. Structured jackets, below-the-knee skirts, gloves folded in pairs like they are waiting for permission to be used. You watch her move through the ritual she has performed 1,000 times before, the same unhurried rhythm, the same order of operations. She selects a blouse first, holding it up to the window light to check the colour hasn't faded, then a skirt to match, then the jacket that completes the set, each piece chosen not for how it makes her feel, but for how correctly it fits the occasion ahead of her. There is a kind of quiet discipline in the way she dresses, a discipline that has nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with propriety, with knowing exactly what is expected of her and delivering it without complaint, the same way she has delivered 100 other small unspoken obligations over the years. The room itself feels like a small museum of restraint. The dresser holds a silver-backed brush and comb, laid out at careful right angles, next to a framed photograph of your father from years before either of you can remember clearly, his smile a little stiff, his hat tilted just so. The perfume bottle sits exactly where it has always sat, its glass stopper catching a thin line of afternoon sun that slants through the gap in the curtains. Even the air in here seems tidier than the air anywhere else in the house, as though disorder simply knows better than to enter, as though the room itself has absorbed some of her own careful nature over the years, breathing it back out slowly, day after day. She catches your eye in the mirror and smiles, the practiced warm smile she saves for moments like this, and asks what you think of the blouse. You tell her it's lovely, because it is in its way, even if it is nothing like what you would choose for yourself now. She nods, satisfied, and reaches for her gloves, smoothing them over each finger with the same patience she uses for everything else in her life. A patience that seems, some days, almost impossible to imagine having yourself, though you suspect it was hard-won rather than natural, built slowly over decades the way calluses build on a hand that works. You lean against the doorframe and watch the small familiar choreography continue. She checks her stockings for runs, angling her leg toward the light the way she has taught you to do since you were young enough to need teaching, tilting first one way and then the other, until she's satisfied nothing has torn. She fastens a strand of pearls that once belonged to her own mother, adjusting the clasp until it sits perfectly centered at the base of her throat, her fingers moving with the ease of long familiarity. Every gesture feels inherited, passed down not through instruction so much as through simple repetition, the way a river carves its path simply by moving the same direction long enough, year after year, until the groove is too deep to easily change. She notices, almost as an afterthought, the dress you wore last week, the one with the shorter hem, the one you bought without telling her first. Her tone isn't sharp, just curious, the way you might ask about a strange new food someone had tried at a dinner party. You tell her it's just the fashion now, and she considers this for a moment before returning to her earrings, letting the subject rest without resolving it, the way she lets most disagreements rest these days, unspoken but not entirely forgotten, filed away for some later conversation that may or may not ever actually happen. You think, watching her, about the years she spent building this closet, piece by careful piece, each item chosen to last, each colour chosen to be forgiving of age and occasion alike. You think about the war years she lived through before you were born, the rationing, the mending, the making do, and how all of that must have shaped this careful, unhurried relationship she has with her clothes, a relationship built on scarcity long after the scarcity itself had passed. You think about how different your own closet has already started to look, less permanent somehow, less built to endure, more built to be enjoyed for a season, and then replaced by whatever comes next. A shift she probably finds a little wasteful, though she has never quite said so outright. She finishes dressing and turns to face you fully, smoothing the front of her skirt one last time before reaching for her handbag. She looks, as she always does, entirely put together, entirely certain of herself in a way you sometimes envy and sometimes quietly pity, though you would never say either thing aloud, not today. not while she is running slightly behind schedule for her luncheon and reaching for her keys with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has never once in her adult life left the house without knowing exactly where she was going and exactly what she would be wearing when she got there. You realize, watching her, that her closet is a record of a world with very clear rules, and that somewhere in the last year, without anyone quite announcing it, those rules have started to loosen just for you. It is not that she is wrong, exactly. It is only that the two of you are dressing for different decades now, standing in the same doorway, in the same house, breathing the same cedar-scented air, and somehow already living in two entirely different worlds. Worlds that will keep drifting a little further apart with every season that passes, gently, without malice, the way all such things eventually do. You've heard about it from a girl at work before you ever see it yourself. A shop tucked between the shoe repair and the drugstore. Too small to be a real department store, too strange to be anything else. When you finally push open the door, a bell rings somewhere above you, and the air smells like new fabric and something faintly like hairspray and ambition. Inside, the space feels almost cramped compared to the wide, orderly aisles of the department stores you're used to, but there's an energy here that those larger stores don't have. Music plays softly from somewhere behind the register, something upbeat you don't quite recognize, a rhythm that seems to belong entirely to people younger than you, though you're not sure by how many years exactly. The lighting is dimmer than you'd expect, almost intimate, as though the whole shop is letting you in on a secret it doesn't share with just anyone who walks past on the sidewalk, a secret meant only for the people willing to push open the door and find out. The racks are crowded close together, dresses in colours that do not have polite names yet, a shade between pink and orange, a green that seems to shimmer faintly under the lights, patterns that swirl and clash in ways that would have seemed like a mistake in any store you've shopped in before. You run your fingers along the hangers, feeling fabrics that are lighter than what you're used to, some of them faintly synthetic, cool and slightly slick beneath your fingertips, nothing like the heavier, more forgiving materials that fill your mother's closet. A rack near the window holds nothing but scarves in patterns so bold they seem to vibrate slightly even hanging still. A girl behind the counter, barely older than you, tells you this is the latest thing from London, that the designs come from young people there who have decided the old rules simply don't apply to them anymore. You do not entirely believe her. The claim feels almost too fashionable to be true, too neat a story to be entirely accurate. But there's something convincing in the certainty of her voice, in the way she says it like she's said it 100 times already this week and believed it every time. Her enthusiasm somehow contagious despite your own better judgment. You take a dress off the rack almost on impulse, holding it against yourself in the mirror propped against the wall, its surface a little clouded at the edges where the silvering has begun to wear thin. The hemline sits far higher than anything hanging in your own closet, the pattern bold in a way that makes your stomach flutter with something between nervousness and excitement, the particular feeling of standing at the edge of something you haven't quite decided whether to jump into. You hold it a little longer than you need to, studying your own reflection, as though it might offer an answer the dress itself cannot. The girl behind the counter watches you with a knowing little smile, as if she has seen this exact moment happen a dozen times already this week. The hesitation, the second glance in the mirror, the slow build toward a decision that feels bigger than it probably is. You ask the price, half expecting it to be more than you can justify, but it's surprisingly reasonable, cheaper even than the dresses in the department store windows you've been admiring from a distance, and you suspect that's part of the appeal, that this whole shop exists to make bold feel affordable, to make change feel like something anyone could simply walk in and buy without a second thought, without saving for weeks the way a proper occasion dress might require. You try it on in a curtained corner that passes for a fitting room, little more than a rod and a length of fabric strung across a gap between two shelves, the fabric settling against you in a way that feels almost weightless compared to your usual clothes, as though you've traded in a full layer of armour for something closer to your own skin. The light back here is dim and a little unflattering, but somehow that only makes the dress feel more honest, less performed, more like something you might actually wear on an ordinary day rather than only for the camera or the occasion. When you step out, the girl behind the counter claps her hands together softly and tells you it's perfect, that you were made for this decade, and you laugh it off, embarrassed, though some small part of you wonders if she might be right. You turn slightly in front of the propped mirror, watching the hems swing gently at your knees, feeling a small thrill at how unfamiliar and yet how entirely natural it feels already. You buy the dress anyway, folding it carefully into the bag she hands you, a plain paper thing with the shop's name stamped in a bold, unfamiliar typeface across the front. You step back out onto the street feeling lighter than when you walked in, as though the small, cluttered shop has given you permission for something you didn't know you were waiting for, some quiet, private permission to want more than what you already had, to want it simply because it was new and bright and entirely your own choice to make. Let's talk about the skirt everyone is discussing this week, whether they approve of it or not. It arrives in your town a little later than the magazine suggests it arrived everywhere else, but arrive it does, resting several inches above the knee in a way that makes your aunt gasp audibly at the church picnic. You try one on in secret first, in your bedroom with the door locked, turning in front of the mirror to see just how strange, how thrilling, how suddenly visible your own legs look. It is the kind of quiet act of rebellion that does not feel like rebellion at all. It just feels like air. You bought the skirt on a whim, tucked at the bottom of a shopping bag beneath a blouse and a pair of stockings, as though hiding it from your own conscience before you could even hide it from your mother. It sat folded in your bottom drawer for nearly a week before you worked up the nerve to try it on, and even then you waited until the house was empty, the afternoon quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of the old house settling around you. Standing in front of the mirror, you smooth the fabric down over your hips, watching the hem land inches higher than anything you have ever worn outside the privacy of your own bedroom. Your legs look longer somehow, more like the legs in the magazine photographs than the legs you have always considered simply, plainly your own. You turn sideways, then turn back, studying the unfamiliar silhouette with a mixture of nervousness and something close to delight. You think about the church picnic last month, your aunt's sharp intake of breath when a younger cousin wore something nearly this short, the way conversation had stopped for just a beat, before resuming at a slightly higher pitch, everyone suddenly very interested in the potato salad. You imagine what she would say if she saw you now, and the thought makes you laugh out loud in the empty room, a short, surprised sound that echoes faintly off the walls. You walk a few steps toward the window and back, testing how the skirt moves, how it swings gently at your knees with each stride, so different from the heavier, more restrained skirts you're used to wearing. There is something almost freeing in the lightness of it, the way it doesn't cling or drag, the way it seems to move with you, rather than simply hang from you like a curtain waiting to be drawn. You catch sight of yourself again in the mirror and pause, really looking this time. It isn't only the length that feels different, it's the whole posture the skirt seems to demand. A little more confidence in the shoulders, a little more ease in the step, as though the fabric itself is asking you to carry yourself differently than you have before. You're not sure yet whether you like the person looking back at you, or whether you simply aren't used to seeing her yet. Downstairs, you hear the front door open, your mother's voice calling out that she is home, and your heart jumps into your throat the way it hasn't since you were a teenager sneaking back in past curfew. You yank the skirt off quickly, nearly tripping over your own feet in the process, and fold it back into the drawer beneath the blouse where it had been hiding all week. By the time your mother reaches the top of the stairs, you're back in your ordinary house dress, cheeks flushed, heart still pounding faintly in your chest. She doesn't notice anything unusual, of course. Why would she? To her it is simply an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Her daughter home from the shops, nothing out of place. But you carry the secret of the skirt with you for the rest of the evening, aware of it folded quietly in your drawer, the way you might be aware of a held breath, waiting for the right moment to let it out. That night, lying in bed, you think about wearing it properly, out in the world, past the mailbox and down the street where the neighbours might see, past the drugstore where the boy behind the counter always says good afternoon a little too warmly. You wonder what it might feel like to walk into a room in that skirt and have people look, really look, the way people looked at the mannequin in the department store window weeks ago. It takes you nearly another week before you find the courage to wear it out properly, slipping out the back door on an errand your mother didn't need done urgently, walking the 4 blocks to the drugstore with your heart hammering the entire way. Nobody stops you. Nobody says a word. A few glances follow you down the sidewalk, some curious, 1 or 2 disapproving, but mostly the world simply continues on as it always has, indifferent to the small, private earthquake happening in your own chest. You walk home a little taller than you left, the hem swinging gently at your knees with each step, the evening air unusually cool against skin that has rarely felt open air quite like this before. It is such a small thing, 4 blocks and back, and yet it feels like the first quiet proof that the rules really have changed, not just in a store window somewhere far away, but here, on your own street, in your own skirt, in your own 2 legs, finally allowed to simply be seen. It is evening now, and you're flipping through a magazine your neighbour lent you, the pages slightly worn from other hands before yours. There is a girl on the cover unlike anyone you have seen modelling clothes before, thin as a reed, hair cropped short, eyes rimmed in lashes so dramatic they look almost painted on. She is British, the caption says, and she has a name that sounds more like a nickname than anything formal. You cannot stop looking at the photograph. It is not just her face, it is the whole shape of what beauty is supposed to look like, quietly rearranging itself in front of you. The magazine sits open on your lap, the lamp beside your chair casting a warm circle of light over the glossy page. Outside, the evening has settled into that particular quiet that comes after dinner, dishes done, radio murmuring low from the next room, your husband somewhere reading his own paper, undisturbed by whatever small revolution is unfolding in your hands. You study the photograph longer than you mean to, tracing the details the way you might study a painting in a museum, trying to understand exactly what it is that makes this face so different from every face you have grown up admiring. Her eyes are enormous, doe-like, rimmed in lashes so long and dark they seem almost like a costume rather than a natural feature. Her frame is slight, almost boyish, nothing like the soft, curved silhouette that filled the magazines of your own girlhood. You think of the actresses your mother used to admire, women with generous curves and carefully waved hair, women built along lines that suggested comfort and abundance rather than the sharp, angular lightness staring back at you now from the page. It occurs to you that an entire idea of what a woman's body is supposed to look like has quietly shifted. The way the hemlines have shifted, the way the colours have shifted, all of it happening so gradually that you almost missed it until this exact moment. Sitting in your own living room with a borrowed magazine in your lap, you flip the page and find more photographs, the same girl in different outfits, different poses, always with that same wide-eyed, almost startled expression, as though perpetually caught in a moment of pleasant surprise. The clothes themselves seem designed for exactly her frame. Simple shapes that would hang oddly on a fuller figure but seem to float weightlessly on hers, as though the garments and the body were designed together, each shaping the other. You glance down at your own frame, tucked beneath your house dress, and feel a small, unfamiliar pang of something you can't quite name. Not envy exactly, but a kind of quiet reassessment, the sense of measuring yourself against a ruler that didn't exist a year ago. You wonder how many other women across the country are sitting in their own living rooms tonight, flipping through this same magazine, feeling this same small shift in how they see themselves. Your neighbour mentioned when she lent you the magazine that hairdressers across town have already started fielding requests for a shorter, cropped style like the one in the photographs. Women walking in with the very same page torn out and tucked into their handbags. You wonder if you might do the same, imagining your own hair cut close to your jaw, wondering whether you would recognise yourself afterward, or whether that might be exactly the point. Your husband glances over from his paper and asks what has you so absorbed. You show him the photograph, and he studies it for a moment with the mild, polite interest of a man asked to appreciate something he doesn't entirely understand. "She's very thin," he says finally, not unkindly, just observationally, the way he might comment on the weather. You nod and don't try to explain the rest of what you're feeling, the strange, quiet vertigo of watching an entire standard shift beneath you. You close the magazine eventually, setting it on the side table beside your chair, but the image stays with you, floating somewhere behind your eyes as you rise to check on the kitchen as you move through the last small tasks of the evening before bed. It is not that you want to look exactly like her, not really. It is more that you cannot stop thinking about how quickly beauty itself seems to have become negotiable, a set of rules being quietly rewritten, one magazine cover at a time, and you wonder, turning off the lamp at last, what the next photograph, the next name, the next silhouette might ask of you before the decade is through. Let's step into your bedroom now, where a new dress lies across your bed, still smelling faintly of the store it came from. The print is unlike anything hanging in your closet before it. Black and white geometry, sharp angles that seem to move even when the fabric is still. You run your hand over it, feeling the crisp new cotton, so different from the soft, faded prints your mother favours. It occurs to you that clothing used to whisper. This dress does not whisper. It is the kind of boldness that would have felt impossible only a year or two earlier. You sit down on the edge of the bed beside it, studying the pattern the way you might study a puzzle, trying to trace where one angle ends and another begins. The lines seem to shift slightly depending on how the light catches them, an optical trick you don't fully understand but find yourself unable to stop watching. It is nothing like the small, polite florals that fill the rest of your wardrobe, nothing like the soft checks and gentle stripes that have always felt safe enough to wear anywhere without a second thought. The late afternoon sun slants through your bedroom window, catching the fabric in a way that makes the black and white seem almost to vibrate against the quilt beneath it. You think of your mother's dresses, the muted blues and dusty roses she has worn for as long as you can remember, patterns designed to blend rather than announce, colours chosen specifically not to draw the eye. This dress does the opposite of everything she taught you. It demands attention. It practically shouts from across the room. You lift it up and hold it against yourself in front of the mirror on your closet door, watching the geometry fall across your body in a way that feels almost architectural, as though you're wearing a small building rather than a garment. The shape itself is simple, a straight, unfussy cut that lets the print do all the work, none of the darts and pleats and careful tailoring that usually goes into constructing a proper dress. You think about where you might wear something so bold, imagining the reactions you'd get walking into the beauty parlour or standing in line at the grocery store, or worse, arriving at your mother's for Sunday dinner in something so far removed from anything she has ever approved of. The thought makes you both nervous and a little thrilled, the particular combination of feelings that seems to accompany nearly everything new this year. You lay the dress back down on the bed and run your fingers over the fabric once more, feeling how crisp and fresh it is compared to the softer, more worn textures you're used to. It hasn't been washed yet, hasn't had the chance to soften into something familiar the way your other clothes have over months and years of wear. Right now, it still belongs entirely to the store, sharp-edged and new, waiting for you to claim it as your own. You remember the woman at the boutique explaining, almost proudly, that patterns like this were impossible to manufacture affordably only a few years back, that new printing techniques had made this kind of boldness possible for ordinary women rather than only the wealthy or the daring. You think about how strange it is that a technical advance in a factory somewhere could end up changing what hangs in your own closet, could end up changing in some small way how you see yourself when you look in the mirror. You decide, somewhat impulsively, to try it on right then, sliding out of your house dress and into the new fabric, feeling the crisp cotton settle against your skin with a stiffness that will soften after a wash or two. Standing in front of the mirror, you turn slowly, watching the geometric shapes shift and rearrange themselves with your movement, an effect that feels almost hypnotic, almost playful in a way clothing has never quite felt to you before. You think of the phrase your neighbour used last week, describing this new style of print as mod, a word that seems to carry an entire attitude within its single syllable, brisk and forward-looking, and entirely uninterested in what came before it. You say the word quietly to yourself in the mirror, trying it out the way you might try out the dress itself, testing whether it fits the person looking back at you. Outside, you can hear the ordinary sounds of the evening beginning, a car passing on the street, someone's screen door slapping shut 2 houses down, the last birds of the day settling into the tree outside your window. The world continues exactly as it always has, entirely unaware of the small private transformation happening in your bedroom, a woman standing in front of her mirror in a dress that didn't exist in this form only a season ago. You change back into your house dress eventually, hanging the new dress carefully in your closet though you notice, hanging it up, that it looks strange and slightly out of place among your quieter, more familiar clothes, like a single loud voice in an otherwise hushed room. You close the closet door and glance at your reflection once more in the mirror, wondering how many more dresses like this will find their way into your closet before the year is through, and wondering too how long it will take before a dress like this simply stops feeling loud at all. It is midweek, and you're getting dressed for work, reaching instinctively for the fitted, structured blouse you have worn for years, the one that nips in at the waist and holds its shape all day no matter what you do. But your hand pauses over a looser piece instead, something closer to a shift, something that moves the way your body moves rather than fighting it. You put it on almost experimentally, waiting to feel improper, waiting for the discomfort of being underdressed. Instead you feel, for the first time in longer than you can say, like your clothes are keeping up with you, instead of holding you back. You stand in front of your closet a moment longer, one hand still resting on the fitted blouse you almost chose, feeling a small twinge of habit tugging at you to simply reach for the familiar thing and get on with your morning. But you've already slipped the new piece over your head, and there's no undoing it now, not with the morning ticking away and the bus due to pass the corner in less than 15 minutes. The fabric settles over your shoulders without any of the usual fuss. No buttons to align at the back, no waistband to smooth and tuck, just a simple unbroken line from shoulder to hem that seems almost too easy after years of careful dressing. You look at yourself in the mirror, half expecting to see someone underdressed, someone who forgot a crucial layer, but instead you see someone who looks, oddly, more finished than usual, despite having done so much less to get there. You think about all the mornings before this one, the careful ritual of fastening a blouse just so, checking that the waist sat at precisely the right point, adjusting and readjusting until every seam fell where it was supposed to fall. This morning you did none of that, and yet somehow the effect feels no less complete, only different, lighter, less concerned with holding a particular shape, and more content simply to follow the shape you already have. You move through your bedroom gathering your things for the day, and you notice, almost immediately, how differently the new blouse behaves compared to the fitted ones you're used to. It doesn't pull when you reach for your handbag on the dresser. It doesn't strain across your shoulders when you bend to retrieve your shoes from beneath the bed. It simply moves with you, unbothered, the way you imagine clothing was always meant to move, though nothing you've owned before this quite managed it. Downstairs, your husband glances up from his coffee and pauses for a moment longer than usual, taking in the new silhouette without quite finding the words to comment on it directly. "Different," he says finally, in a tone that isn't disapproving so much as simply adjusting to something unfamiliar. You tell him you like it, and he nods, returning to his paper, the matter apparently settled as far as he's concerned. At the office later that morning, you notice one or two of the other women glancing your way, not unkindly, but with the particular attentiveness of people cataloguing a change they aren't sure yet whether to follow. One of them asks during the mid-morning break where you found the blouse, and you tell her about the shop downtown, watching her file the information away with visible interest. You spend the day moving through your usual tasks, typing, filing, answering the telephone at your desk, and you notice, throughout, a small persistent ease that you hadn't expected, a sense of not having to think about your clothing at all once you'd put it on that morning. There's no need to check whether your waistband has shifted, no discomfort building slowly across your ribs by mid-afternoon the way there sometimes is with more structured pieces. The blouse simply exists around you, unremarkable in its comfort, remarkable only in how unremarkable it manages to feel. By the time you're walking home that evening, the light softening into early dusk, you find yourself thinking about all the years you spent dressing for a shape that wasn't quite your own, cinching and structuring and holding yourself into lines that some tailor somewhere had decided were flattering long before you ever had a say in the matter. You think about how strange it is that comfort itself had to wait for permission, that it took an entire shift in fashion before anyone considered simply letting your clothes follow your body instead of the other way around. You reach your front steps and pause for a moment before going inside, glancing down at the simple, unstructured fabric one more time, smoothing it absent-mindedly over your hips. It isn't a dramatic change, not the way the department store window or the boutique dress had felt dramatic. It's quieter than that, a small private adjustment in how your day felt from the very first button, or in this case from the complete absence of one. But small as it is, you suspect it's the kind of change that, once felt, is very hard to give back. Let's head to the shoe department, where something strange has happened to the shelves. Beside the sensible pumps your mother would choose sit rows of white leather boots, calf-height, flat-soled, gleaming under the store lights like something out of a science program rather than a fashion catalogue. You slide your foot into one, feeling the snug, unfamiliar shape close around your ankle. The saleswoman tells you they're called go-go boots, and she says it with a small knowing smile, as if she already understands you will be wearing them out of the store. You sit on the padded bench in front of the mirror, one boot already on, the other still in the saleswoman's hands as she waits for your reaction. The leather is stiffer than you expected, holding its shape around your calf in a way that feels almost architectural, nothing like the soft, pliable leather of the pumps you've worn for years. You flex your foot experimentally. testing the give of the sole, surprised to find it flatter and more practical than anything so striking has any right to be. The saleswoman kneels to help you with the second boot, chatting easily as she works the zipper up the side. She tells you these have been flying off the shelves since they arrived a few weeks back, that women twice your mother's age have come in asking for a pair after seeing their daughters or granddaughters wearing them around town. You find this hard to picture, imagining your own grandmother in anything so bold, but the saleswoman insists it's true, that the boots have a way of making converts out of the most unlikely people. Once both boots are zipped into place, you stand and take a few careful steps toward the mirror, watching your reflection with a kind of fascinated disbelief. Your legs look different entirely, the white leather cutting a clean, graphic line against your skirt, drawing the eye downward in a way none of your other shoes have ever done. You take a few more steps, growing more confident with each one, surprised at how light the boots feel despite their sturdy appearance, nothing like the stiff, unforgiving dress shoes you associate with anything this formal looking. You glance over at the row of sensible pumps sitting untouched a few feet away. The shoes you came into the store fully intending to buy. The shoes that would have matched everything in your closet without a moment's hesitation. They look suddenly plain beside the boots, almost apologetic in their beige leather and modest heel, as though they belong to an entirely different woman than the one currently admiring her own reflection in white calf-high leather. The saleswoman asks if you'd like to walk around the store a bit more, get used to the feel before deciding, and you take her up on the offer, moving between the aisles with growing ease, testing how the boots handle turning a corner, climbing the small step near the fitting rooms, standing still while you glance at a rack of stockings you no longer suspect you'll need quite so many of. Each small test builds your confidence a little further, until by the time you return to the mirror, you've nearly convinced yourself these were the only sensible shoes in the store all along. You think about where you might actually wear them, picturing yourself walking to the market, boots clicking smartly against the sidewalk, or standing at the bus stop while other women glance down at your feet with the same startled curiosity you felt looking at the department store window weeks earlier. You wonder whether your own mother would gasp the way your aunt gasped at the miniskirt, or whether even she might be quietly tempted standing in this same spot, sliding her own foot into the unfamiliar leather. The saleswoman mentions, almost as an afterthought, that a designer overseas started the whole trend, someone who decided shoes should be playful rather than purely practical, decided that footwear could have its own kind of youthful spirit instead of simply serving the outfit above it. You think about how strange it is that a single idea, dreamed up somewhere far across an ocean, could travel all this way to end up wrapped around your own ankles on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. You decide, standing there in front of the mirror, that you'll buy the boots after all, setting the sensible pumps quietly back on their shelf without a second thought. The saleswoman rings up your purchase with obvious satisfaction, tucking tissue paper around the boots before boxing them, though you find yourself asking a little sheepishly if you might just wear them out of the store instead. She laughs, clearly delighted, and boxes your old shoes instead, the sensible ones you arrived in, now relegated to the bag you'll carry home. You step out onto the sidewalk in your new boots, the white leather catching the afternoon sun, and you find yourself walking a little differently than you did on the way in, a little more deliberately, a little more aware of your own footsteps against the pavement, as though the boots themselves have asked you to notice the ground beneath you for the very first time. It is Saturday morning, and you are standing at the beauty counter, watching the girl ahead of you buy a lipstick in a shade that would have been considered too much only a few years back. A pale, almost ghostly pink instead of the deep red your mother keeps in her handbag. The counter itself feels different too, brighter, louder, stocked with products that promise to make your eyes look bigger, your lashes look longer, your whole face look like it belongs to someone younger and freer than the women in the magazines your mother reads. You wait your turn a few feet back, studying the displays arranged along the glass counter. Testers lined up in neat rows, each one promising some new transformation you hadn't known you needed until this exact moment. The girl ahead of you turns the lipstick over in her hand, checking the shade against the light, before nodding to the clerk and setting it on the counter beside a small compact of pale powder. Nothing at all like the warm, rosy shades your mother has favoured her whole life. When it's your turn, the clerk behind the counter greets you with a particular enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loves her work, gesturing toward a new display near the register, featuring a whole line of products you don't recognise, packaging brighter and bolder than anything you've bought before, more like the label on a record album than what you'd expect from a cosmetics counter. She picks up a small wand of mascara and explains, with visible excitement, that this one is meant to be applied in layers, building up length and volume in a way the old formulas never managed. You let her demonstrate on the back of your hand, watching as the thick, dark formula catches even the fine hairs along your knuckle, imagining what it might do to your own lashes. She hands you a small hand mirror and encourages you to try a shade of eyeshadow next. Something pale and shimmering rather than the more muted browns and taupes you've always reached for, explaining that the whole idea now is to make the eyes look larger, rounder, more like a doll's than like anything meant to disappear quietly into the rest of your face. You dab a little onto your eyelid tentatively, studying the effect in the small mirror, surprised at how it catches the light, how it seems to open your whole face up in a way you hadn't expected from something so simple. The clerk nods approvingly and reaches for another product. A pale, nearly invisible lipstick that she explains is meant to be the opposite of everything lipstick used to be, drawing attention away from the mouth entirely, so all the focus lands on the eyes instead. You think of your mother's lipstick, the same deep, confident red she has worn to church and to luncheons and to every important occasion for as long as you can remember, a colour chosen specifically to be noticed, to announce itself the moment she enters a room. This pale, quiet shade does the opposite, receding rather than announcing, and you wonder what she would say if she saw you wearing it, whether she would think you looked unfinished, or whether in some strange way she might understand the appeal despite herself. The clerk continues explaining the new approach, pointing out a small brush meant specifically for filling in the brows, thicker and more deliberate than anything used before, meant to frame the newly dramatic eyes rather than simply following their natural shape. You find yourself nodding along, absorbing information at a pace that feels almost dizzying, as though the entire language of beauty has been quietly rewritten while you weren't paying close enough attention. You purchase a few items in the end: the mascara, the pale eyeshadow, a small pot of something the clerk calls a foundation stick, promising an even, matte finish unlike the heavier creams you've used before. She wraps each item carefully in tissue paper before placing them in a small paper bag, thanking you warmly and reminding you, as you turn to leave, that she's happy to help again whenever you're ready to try the next new thing. Walking out of the store, bag in hand, you think about the girl who left just before you, her pale pink lipstick already applied, walking down the sidewalk with the easy confidence of someone entirely unbothered by how different she looks from her own mother's generation. You wonder how long it will take before you feel that same ease, standing in front of your own mirror at home, blending the new pale shadow across your eyelids for the first time without the clerk's steady hand to guide you. You walk home slowly, turning the small paper bag over in your hands, feeling the same mixture of nervousness and anticipation you felt trying on the miniskirt in the privacy of your bedroom weeks earlier. It occurs to you that beauty, like fashion, has quietly stopped whispering too, and started instead to speak in a much bolder voice than anyone your mother's age ever learned to use. Let's finish this stretch of the morning in your bedroom, getting dressed for the day the way you always have, reaching for the girdle that has lived in your top drawer since you were old enough to need one. But beside it now sits something new, a single sheer garment that promises to do the job of three. No hooks, no snaps, no stiff panels digging into your hips. You pull them on, half suspicious, half hopeful, and feel, almost immediately, how much lighter getting dressed can be, when your clothing stops trying to rearrange your body into someone else's idea of proper. You hold the girdle in one hand and the new garment in the other for a long moment, comparing them the way you might compare an old friend to a stranger who has just walked into the room. The girdle is heavier than you remember, its panels stiff even now after years of wear, still holding the shape of every hook and eye sewn carefully into its structure. The new garment, by contrast, feels almost like nothing at all, a sheer, stretching fabric that seems to promise ease rather than discipline. You set the girdle aside on the bed, feeling a small, unexpected pang of loyalty toward it, the way you might feel setting aside an old coat you know you should replace, but can't quite bring yourself to throw away. It has done its job faithfully for years, after all, smoothing and shaping and holding you into the silhouette every dress in your closet was built to expect. But this morning, standing in the quiet of your bedroom, you find yourself reaching for the new garment instead. Curious despite your hesitation. Pulling them on takes only a moment, none of the careful positioning and fastening the girdle always demanded, no need to check in the mirror that every hook sat exactly where it should. The fabric simply stretches into place, following the shape of your legs and hips without any resistance, without any of the familiar faint ache that used to settle across your ribs by mid-morning after a girdle had been cinched too tightly for comfort. You stand in front of the mirror studying the effect, surprised at how natural your own silhouette looks, without the careful architecture you've relied on for years. There's no dramatic difference to the eye, nothing anyone passing you on the street would notice, but you feel it immediately in the ease of your own movement, the way you can bend at the waist without any resistance, the way you can simply breathe without first checking how tightly you're laced into place. You think of all the mornings before this one, the ritual of the girdle, the careful checking and rechecking, the small discomforts you'd long since stopped noticing simply because you'd never known anything different. It occurs to you, standing here now, how much of your daily life has quietly been built around discomfort disguised as necessity. How many small aches you'd simply accepted as the unavoidable price of looking properly put together. You finish dressing, pulling your skirt on over the new garment, smoothing it down over your hips the way you always do, though this time there's no need to check for any visible lines or ridges beneath the fabric, nothing to give away the structure underneath because there is, in fact, so much less structure to give away. You catch your reflection once more before heading downstairs, turning slightly side to side, trying to decide whether you can tell the difference in how the skirt falls. You can't. Not really. Not in any way anyone else would notice. But you can feel it, in the lightness of your step going down the stairs, in the way you settle into your chair at the breakfast table, without first needing to adjust anything beneath your clothes. Your husband glances up from his coffee and asks, as he always does, whether you slept well, and you tell him yes, though the truth is you feel more awake, more comfortable in your own skin this morning than you have in longer than you can easily remember. Later, folding the girdle away into the back of your drawer rather than the front, you feel a small, quiet sense of an era ending, not dramatically, Not with any fanfare, just quietly, the way so many of these changes seem to arrive lately, one ordinary morning at a time. You think of your mother, still faithfully wearing her own girdle every single day, unaware yet that anything has changed, unaware that somewhere in town, department stores have already begun quietly reducing their orders for the very garment she trusts completely. You close the drawer and head down to start your day, feeling for the first time in years like your clothing has stopped asking anything difficult of you at all, like it has finally, quietly, agreed simply to let you be as you already are. Let's step into the salon now, where something is happening to the chairs lined up against the mirror. Woman after woman is leaving with hair shorter than anything your mother's generation would have called finished, geometric, blunt, cut close to the jaw in a shape so precise it looks almost architectural. You sit down in the chair yourself, feeling strangely brave, and watch inches of hair you have grown for years fall quietly to the floor. When the stylist turns you toward the mirror, you barely recognize the woman looking back, and you're not entirely sure that is a bad thing. The salon smells the way it always has, that particular mixture of setting lotion and warm metal from the dryers along the back wall. But everything else about the room feels subtly different today. The radio behind the counter plays something brisk and rhythmic instead of the usual soft orchestral hum, and the women waiting their turn seem to be leaning forward in their chairs rather than settling back the way they used to, watching the chairs ahead of them with open curiosity. Your stylist, a woman you've trusted with your hair for years, runs her fingers through your long waves for a moment before picking up her scissors, studying your face in the mirror the way an artist might study a blank canvas before the first stroke. She tells you this new cut requires precision rather than curls, that it depends entirely on the geometry of the cut itself, rather than any rollers or setting lotion to hold its shape. You nod, though you aren't entirely certain what you're agreeing to. The first cut takes you by surprise, a long section of hair falling away all at once rather than the careful incremental trims you're used to. You watch it land on the floor beside the chair, a length of hair you've been growing and caring for since before you can easily remember, and feel a small jolt somewhere in your chest, not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that there's no simply putting this back once it's done. Your stylist works quickly and confidently, sectioning your hair with the sharp edge of a comb, checking the line against your jaw again and again as she goes, adjusting by fractions of an inch until she seems satisfied. She explains, as she works, that this technique came from a hairdresser in London who decided women didn't need curls or teasing or any artificial structure at all, that the cut itself, done precisely enough, could hold its own shape without any help. You watch in the mirror as your reflection changes bit by bit. The soft, rounded shape you've worn your whole adult life giving way to something sharper, more defined, a line along your jaw that seems almost too clean to be real. Your neck feels suddenly exposed in a way it hasn't in years, lighter, cooler, oddly vulnerable and freeing all at once. You reach up instinctively to touch where your hair used to fall past your shoulders, finding only air where you expected weight. The woman in the chair beside you catches your eye in the mirror and smiles, her own hair freshly cut into the same clean geometric shape. And there's a small, wordless understanding that passes between you, the same kind of recognition you felt standing in front of the department store window weeks ago. Two strangers quietly aware that something has shifted for both of them at once. Your stylist steps back finally, setting down her scissors, and turns your chair slowly toward the full mirror so you can see the whole effect rather than just the fragments you've been watching in pieces. You stare for a long moment, genuinely startled by your own reflection, by how much younger and somehow more modern you look, though nothing about your actual face has changed at all. It is only the frame around it that's different, and yet the difference feels enormous. You run your fingers through the shortened length, testing how it falls back into place on its own without any need to smooth or adjust, exactly as your stylist promised. There's something almost thrilling in how little maintenance it seems to require, how it simply holds its shape through the sharpness of the cut itself, rather than any effort on your part each morning. You think, sitting there, of all the years spent setting your hair in curlers each night, the careful teasing and spraying each morning before you could leave the house, the whole elaborate ritual required just to achieve a shape considered properly finished. This new cut seems to erase all of that in a single afternoon, replacing hours of daily effort with a single, precise appointment every few weeks instead. Your stylist hands you a small mirror so you can check the back, and you turn slowly, studying the clean line at your nape, feeling the unfamiliar lightness of your own neck exposed to the salon's cool air. You think about walking out onto the street like this, about what your mother will say when she sees you, about whether your husband will recognize you from across the room when he comes to pick you up. You pay at the counter, still touching your hair every few moments as though checking it's really there, really this short, really yours now. Stepping outside, the afternoon light catches the sharp edges of the cut, and you catch your reflection once more in the salon's front window, barely recognizing the woman looking back, and finding, to your quiet surprise, that you like her quite a lot. It is Tuesday afternoon, and you're standing in the department store aisle, running your fingers along a rack of dresses that all fit a standard size. No fitting appointment required, no waiting weeks for alterations. Your mother always had things made, or made them herself, a process that took patience you never quite had. Now you simply lift a dress off the hanger, hold it against yourself in front of the mirror, and know within moments whether it belongs to you. It feels almost too easy, this sudden casual access to style that used to require money, time, and a very particular kind of patience. You move slowly down the aisle, letting your fingers trail across one hanger after another, feeling the different textures pass beneath your hand. Cotton, then a light wool blend, then something with a faint synthetic sheen you still haven't quite gotten used to. Each dress is labelled with a size printed neatly on a small paper tag, a number that promises, with a confidence you find slightly suspicious, to fit your particular frame without a single adjustment. You think of your mother's sewing room, the hours she spent bent over her machine each season, pins clenched between her lips, muttering measurements to herself as she pieced together a dress from a paper pattern and several yards of fabric bought specifically for the purpose. Every dress she's ever owned was built for her exact shape, fitted and refitted until it hung exactly as she wanted, a process that could take days depending on how ambitious the pattern happened to be. You select a dress from the rack, a soft yellow shift with a simple clean line, and check the tag against what you believe your own size to be, though you aren't entirely sure yet how reliable these standardized numbers really are. You carry it toward the fitting room, passing racks of shoes and gloves and hats along the way, all similarly ready to be taken home the very same afternoon, no waiting required. Inside the fitting room you slip out of your clothes and into the yellow dress, working the zipper up your own back without any assistance, surprised at how easily it moves into place. You turn in front of the small mirror mounted to the wall, studying how the dress falls across your shoulders, checking the hem length, adjusting the way it sits at your waist. It isn't perfect, not quite as precisely fitted as something your mother might have made for you by hand, but it's close enough that the small imperfections hardly seem to matter next to the sheer convenience of simply having it ready to wear. You think about how strange this would have seemed to your grandmother's generation. The idea of buying clothing off a rack the same way you might buy a loaf of bread. No measurements taken, no fitting appointments scheduled weeks in advance. Just a simple exchange of money for a garment that's already finished and waiting. It occurs to you that an entire skill, patiently passed down through generations of women in your family, might not be needed quite the same way going forward, not now that dresses can simply appear on a rack instead. You step out of the fitting room to study yourself in the larger mirror outside, turning slowly to check the dress from every angle, and a saleswoman passing by pauses to offer her opinion, telling you the yellow suits you beautifully, that it's one of their most popular styles this season. You ask her how it's possible to make so many dresses so quickly, and she explains, with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to answering the question, that new manufacturing techniques allow factories to produce identical dresses by the hundreds now, each one cut from the same pattern, sewn on the same machines, finished in a fraction of the time it used to take by hand. You think of your mother's sewing machine sitting quietly in the corner of her workroom, still faithfully used every week, though perhaps you suspect a little less than it used to be now that dresses like this one exist. You wonder whether she'll ever set aside her needle and thread entirely, or whether some part of her will always prefer the careful, deliberate process of building a dress herself, stitch by stitch, rather than simply lifting one off a rack. You decide to buy the yellow dress, along with 2 others you'd tried on before it, carrying them to the register where the clerk folds each one carefully into tissue paper, before boxing them for you to take home immediately. No waiting, no return visit required. You leave the store that afternoon with 3 new dresses in hand, an entire small wardrobe acquired in less time than it would have taken your mother just to select a single pattern. Walking to the bus stop, boxes tucked under your arm, you think about how quickly your relationship with clothing itself seems to be changing, how casual and immediate it has all become compared to the careful, patient process you grew up watching your mother perform. It doesn't feel lesser exactly, just different, faster, a little less personal perhaps, but undeniably, wonderfully convenient in a way that leaves you with more time now for everything else waiting for you at home. Let's pause in the sewing room, the one your mother has used every week of your childhood, the machine humming faithfully in the corner by the window. Lately it sits untouched more often than not, its cover on, the spools of thread gathering the faintest layer of dust. You remember summers spent cutting patterns from tissue paper, pinning fabric, listening to the rhythmic clatter of the needle late into the evening. There is something quietly sad about the silence now, even as you understand exactly why the machine has gone quiet. The dresses simply arrive finished now, and no one seems to miss the work quite as much as you expected they might. You stand in the doorway of the small room for a long moment, taking in the details you've walked past 1,000 times without really seeing. The worn patch on the rug where your mother's chair has sat for years, the corkboard on the wall still pinned with half-finished pattern pieces from a dress she never got around to completing. The afternoon light slants through the window the same way it always has, catching dust motes that seem to hang suspended in the quiet air rather than settling anywhere at all. You walk over to the machine itself, running your hand lightly along its dusty cover before lifting it away, revealing the familiar black metal body beneath, the gold lettering along its side a little worn from years of use. You remember watching your mother's foot working the treadle beneath the table, the steady, rhythmic clatter that used to fill this room every evening after dinner, a sound so constant throughout your childhood that its absence now feels almost like a held breath that never quite gets released. You open the drawer beside the machine, finding spools of thread in every colour imaginable, still neatly organised the way your mother always kept them, though a fine layer of dust has settled across the top of each one now. Beside the thread sits a small tin of pins, a pair of fabric shears kept sharp for years through careful use, a tape measure coiled neatly beside a stack of pattern envelopes, their illustrations faded slightly from age but still recognizable. Women in dresses from years past, styles your mother once considered the height of fashion. You pick up one of the patterns, studying the illustration on the front, a fitted dress with a full skirt, the kind of silhouette that filled your mother's closet for decades. You think about how many hours she must have spent constructing dresses like this one, cutting the tissue paper pattern pieces with careful precision, pinning them to fabric she'd chosen specifically for the occasion, feeding each piece slowly beneath the needle while the machine clattered its steady rhythm long into the evening. You remember too the summer she spent teaching you the same skills, patiently guiding your hands as you struggled to keep a straight seam, correcting your grip on the fabric, showing you how to thread the needle and win the bobbin just so. You were never quite as skilled as she was, never developed the same easy patience for the careful, repetitive work, though you remember loving those long afternoons together nonetheless. The two of you bent over the same table, the radio playing softly in the background. You wonder when exactly the machine went quiet, whether there was a single afternoon you could point to as the last time she used it regularly, or whether it happened so gradually that neither of you quite noticed the shift until now, standing here in the dusty stillness of a room that used to hum with constant, purposeful noise. You suspect it happened the way most of these changes seem to happen lately, not all at once, but quietly, dress by dress, until one day the machine simply sat covered more often than not, and nobody remarked on it. You close the drawer gently and cover the machine again, smoothing the fabric cover back into place the way your mother always did when she finished for the evening. There's something almost ceremonial in the gesture, though you're not entirely sure what exactly you're honouring, the machine itself, or the years of patient work it represents, or simply the quiet, steady rhythm of an era that seems, without any fanfare at all, to be coming gently to its close. You think about mentioning it to your mother later, asking whether she misses the work, whether the silence in this room ever catches her the way it's caught you standing here just now. But you suspect, somehow, that she already knows exactly what has changed, that she's made her own quiet peace with dresses that arrive ready-made from a store rather than emerging slowly from beneath her own careful hands, and that perhaps there's no need to disturb whatever piece she's found by asking the question aloud. You leave the sewing room as you found it, closing the door softly behind you, the machine settling back into its dusty quiet, waiting, perhaps, for some future afternoon when someone might need it again, though you suspect, deep down, that afternoon may never quite arrive the way it once did, and that the silence, however quietly sad, is simply the sound of one small, patient tradition, making room for whatever comes next. You're at a party now, and the girl across the room is wearing something that rustles strangely every time she moves, a dress made, astonishingly, of paper. It is printed with bold, bright flowers, meant to be worn a handful of times and then discarded entirely, a novelty as much as a garment. You touch the sleeve carefully when she passes, half expecting it to tear beneath your fingers. It feels like the strangest possible symbol of how quickly everything is changing, that even permanence itself has started to feel optional. The party hums around you with its usual mix of music and conversation, glasses clinking somewhere near the makeshift bar, someone's laughter rising above the general murmur every few minutes. But your attention keeps drifting back to the girl in the paper dress, watching the way the fabric catches the light differently than any other garment in the room, stiffer, somehow flatter, with a faint sheen that seems almost like a photograph rather than actual cloth. She catches you staring and laughs, clearly delighted by the reaction, holding out her arm so you can examine the sleeve more closely. "Go ahead," she says. "Touch it. Everyone wants to." You run your fingers carefully along the fabric, surprised at how much it genuinely does feel like heavy paper, slightly textured, faintly cool, with none of the softness or drape you'd expect from anything meant to be worn against skin. She explains, still laughing a little at your obvious astonishment, that the dress arrived folded flat in a mailing envelope, delivered right to her door the same way a magazine or a letter might arrive. She tells you it costs less than a proper dress, barely more than a nice blouse, and that she has 3 more just like it in different prints waiting in her closet at home, each one meant to be worn only a handful of times before it starts to show wear. You ask, somewhat incredulous, what happens when the dress eventually falls apart, and she shrugs easily, explaining that you simply throw it away and order another, the way you might discard a magazine once you've finished reading it. There's no mending, no careful preservation, none of the effort your mother has always put into making a good dress last for years, through careful laundering and thoughtful storage. You think of your mother's closet, every dress folded with careful attention, brushed and aired and stored away from moths and sunlight, treated the way you might treat something you expect to keep for a decade or more. This paper dress represents the opposite of everything she taught you about clothing, an entire garment built specifically to be temporary, disposable, replaced without a second thought the moment it wears out. The girl twirls slightly to show off the print, the paper rustling audibly with the movement, a sound unlike anything you've heard from clothing before, closer to the sound of unwrapping a gift than anything you'd associate with getting dressed. Several other guests have gathered around now, all equally fascinated, asking their own questions, touching the fabric themselves, marvelling at the strange, thrilling novelty of it all. Someone asks whether it's comfortable, and she admits it's a little stiffer than regular fabric, a little less forgiving when you sit down too quickly. But she says the trade-off feels worth it for how striking the print looks, how completely unlike anything anyone else at the party is wearing. You think about the boutique dress in your own closet, bold and unusual as it seemed at the time, and realise it already feels almost conservative next to this. You wonder what your mother would say if she saw this dress, whether she would be horrified at the sheer waste of it, an entire garment meant to be thrown away after only a few wearings, or whether some small part of her might be secretly charmed by the audacity of the idea, a dress that asks nothing of you beyond enjoying it while it lasts. Later in the evening, as the party begins to wind down, you watch the girl gather her things to leave, the paper dress rustling softly with each movement, and you find yourself wondering how many more wearings it has left in it. How soon she'll fold it away for the last time and simply order something new to replace it. There's something almost freeing in the thought. The idea that clothing doesn't have to carry the weight of permanence, that it can simply exist for a season, a party, a single spectacular evening, and then disappear without any guilt attached to its disappearing. You think about this the whole way home, turning the strange, rustling dress over in your mind the way you might turn over an unfamiliar idea, testing its edges, deciding how you feel about it. It isn't something you'd necessarily buy yourself, not yet anyway, but it lingers with you nonetheless, a small papery symbol of just how far this decade seems willing to go in reimagining what clothing is even supposed to be. Let's walk across the quad now, where the girls heading to class look nothing like the yearbook photos from just a few years earlier. Turtlenecks instead of blouses, trousers instead of skirts on more than a few of them, worn without apology. You adjust your own outfit self-consciously, aware that what feels daring to you barely registers as unusual here, among girls who seem to have absorbed the new rules faster than anyone back home. It is the kind of place where change arrives first, tested quietly among people young enough not to be afraid of it yet. You've come to visit your younger cousin at school, and the campus itself feels like stepping into a slightly different version of the world you left behind that morning. The same autumn light falling across brick buildings and wide green lawns, but everything moving through that light dressed in ways that would have caused a small scandal back in your own hometown. Girls walk briskly between buildings in trousers cut close to the leg, comfortable and unremarkable to everyone around them, though you find your eyes drawn to each pair as though cataloguing evidence of some quiet, ongoing experiment. Your cousin meets you near the library steps, and you notice immediately that she too has adopted the look, a simple turtleneck tucked into dark trousers, her hair cut shorter than you remember from her last visit home, styled in the same clean, geometric shape you saw women adopting back at the salon weeks earlier. She hugs you warmly and immediately notices you studying her outfit, laughing a little at your obvious curiosity. Everyone dresses this way now, she explains, leading you across the quad toward the dining hall, gesturing casually at the other students passing by as proof. She tells you those hemlines and trousers that felt so daring in your own town barely register as unusual here, that an entire campus of young women seems to have skipped straight past the hesitation you still feel and landed comfortably on the other side of it. You watch a group of girls pass by, deep in conversation, books clutched against their chests, dressed in an easy mixture of turtlenecks and trousers, and the occasional bold geometric print you recognise from your own new dress at home. None of them seem to be making any kind of statement with their clothing, no defiant posture, no self-conscious glances checking for reactions. It simply is what they wear, as unremarkable to them as your own mother's structured skirts once felt to her. Your cousin explains as you walk that the campus has its own small rhythm to these things, styles arriving here sometimes months before they reach the department stores back home, tested first among students who seem naturally less anxious about being the first ones to try something new. She mentions a professor who lectures in slacks now, unheard of a few years back, and a dormitory hallway where half the girls have already adopted the same cropped hairstyle you're still working up the nerve to get yourself. You think about your own hesitation walking down the street in your miniskirt a few weeks back, the careful timing, the nervous glance over your shoulder, the sense that you were testing some unspoken limit with every step. Here, on this campus, that same hesitation seems entirely absent, replaced by an easy, unbothered confidence that makes you feel, standing among these girls, oddly older than your years, as though you've arrived several steps behind a conversation that's already well underway. Your cousin leads you into the dining hall, where more of the same casual, confident style surrounds you. Girls chatting over lunch trays in trousers and turtlenecks, their hair short and their voices easy, unburdened by any need to explain or defend what they're wearing. You sit down across from her, studying the room, feeling the small, persistent sense that you're witnessing something in its earliest, most natural form, before it has travelled outward to the rest of the country and softened into something more ordinary. She asks about home, about your mother, and you tell her, laughing a little, that your mother still hasn't quite recovered from the sight of your new dress, let alone anything as bold as trousers. Your cousin laughs too, though not unkindly, and says she suspects her own mother would feel much the same if she saw the campus today, that some things simply take longer to travel from a place like this back out into the wider, more cautious world. You spend the rest of the afternoon walking the quad together, and by the time you leave to catch your train home, you find yourself standing a little differently than you did that morning, shoulders back, chin slightly higher, as though some of the easy confidence surrounding you all day has quietly rubbed off despite your best efforts to simply observe from the outside. You think, boarding the train, that it won't be long now before what you saw today stops looking daring anywhere at all, and simply becomes, quietly and without fanfare, the way everyone dresses. It is early morning, and you're standing in front of your closet trying to decide what a modern working woman is supposed to wear to the office. The structured suits your mother's generation relied on still hang there, dependable and a little heavy. Beside them, newer pieces have crept in, simpler lines, brighter colours, blouses that do not require quite so much fuss to put together. You reach for something in between the two, not quite ready to abandon the old rules entirely, not quite willing to ignore the new ones either. You stand there longer than you mean to, one hand resting on the sleeve of a heavy grey suit jacket, the same kind you've worn to the office nearly every day for years, sturdy and reliable and entirely unremarkable. Beside it hangs a newer blouse in a soft, unexpected shade of coral, paired with a simple skirt that sits just slightly shorter than what you're used to, not daring exactly, but noticeably different from the careful, conservative lines that fill the rest of your closet. The morning light through your bedroom window catches both options at once, the muted grey of the old suit and the brighter coral of the newer piece, and you find yourself genuinely torn, weighing the day ahead against each choice. There's a meeting this afternoon with clients who still expect the older, more formal style, but there's also the newer energy of the office itself, the younger secretaries who've already begun showing up in brighter colours and simpler cuts, without any apparent consequence. You think of the other women at your office, how the divide seems to run roughly along the lines of age, though not entirely. The older secretaries clinging faithfully to their structured suits and sensible pumps, while several of the younger ones have already embraced brighter colours, shorter hemlines, the same easy, unbothered confidence you noticed among the college girls on your recent visit to your cousin's campus. You've been caught somewhere in between the two groups for months now, unsure which side you actually belong to. You finally reach for the coral blouse, pairing it with the newer skirt rather than the heavier suit, though you add a simple, structured jacket over the top, as a small concession to the formality the afternoon meeting will require. Looking at yourself in the mirror, you think the combination strikes a reasonable balance, modern enough not to look entirely out of step with younger women in the office, formal enough not to raise any eyebrows among the clients coming in later. At the office, you notice immediately how the divide plays out among your colleagues. One secretary near the window still faithfully dressed in a structured suit nearly identical to the one you almost chose yourself, while two younger women near the filing cabinets chat easily in bright, simple dresses that would have seemed almost inappropriately casual for office wear only a year or two earlier. Nobody seems bothered by the mixture, though you notice your supervisor's eyes linger a beat longer than usual on the shorter hemlines passing his office door. You settle into your own desk, smoothing the coral blouse self-consciously, feeling both slightly bold and slightly cautious at once, a combination that seems to characterize most of what you've tried this year. A co-worker passing your desk compliments the colour, telling you it suits you far better than the greys and navies you usually wear, and you thank her, feeling a small, unexpected warmth at the compliment, though you're still not entirely certain you've made the right choice for this particular day. The afternoon meeting arrives, and you find yourself glancing down at your outfit more than once while the clients speak, checking that the jacket still conveys enough formality despite the brighter blouse underneath it. Nobody comments on your clothing at all, of course. The client's far more interested in the numbers you've prepared than in the colour of your blouse, and you realise, sitting there, that you'd built up far more anxiety over the choice than the moment itself actually warranted. By the end of the day, walking home with your jacket now folded over your arm in the mild evening air, you think about how much energy you'd spent that morning simply deciding what to wear, weighing old rules against new ones, trying to satisfy both the client meeting and your own quiet desire to keep pace with the younger women down the hall. You suspect this particular calculation, old against new, formal against easy, will keep repeating itself every morning for a while yet, at least until one side or the other eventually, quietly, wins out entirely. You think too about your mother's structured suits, still hanging faithfully in her own closet, unchanged and unbothered by any of this quiet daily negotiation you found yourself caught in. There's something almost comforting in her certainty, even as you suspect you could never quite return to it yourself now, not after feeling, if only briefly, how much lighter the coral blouse felt against your skin this morning compared to the heavier grey suit waiting patiently beside it. Let's step back for a moment and take in the bigger picture, the one the magazines have started calling a youthquake, as though an earthquake of youth itself has rippled through fashion, music and manners all at once. You notice it most clearly at family gatherings now. The gap widening between what your mother considers appropriate and what feels natural to you, not out of disrespect, but simply because you were shaped by a different set of years than she was. It is strange and a little tender, realizing that the ground under an entire generation has shifted, while everyone was simply getting dressed each morning. You first heard the word in a magazine article your neighbour passed along, a breathless piece describing an entire cultural shift in a single, tidy phrase, as though someone had finally found the right label for something that had been building quietly for years without a name. You read the article twice, struck by how precisely it described the small, scattered observations you'd been collecting all on your own. The department store window, the boutique dress, the paper party gown, the girls on your cousin's campus moving through the world with an ease you still hadn't quite managed yourself. At your family's gathering last weekend, you noticed the gap more clearly than you ever had before, watching your younger cousins cluster together near the record player, their skirts short, their laughter loud, entirely unself-conscious in a way that seemed almost foreign compared to how carefully you remember behaving at family gatherings only a decade earlier. Your aunts and uncles sat in the next room, dressed as they've always dressed, structured and formal, occasionally glancing toward the younger group with expressions you couldn't quite read, something between fondness and faint bewilderment. Your mother caught your eye across the room at one point, and you both watched together as one of your younger cousins demonstrated a new dance step, her short skirt swinging with each movement, utterly unbothered by the attention she was drawing from the older relatives nearby. Your mother didn't say anything critical exactly, just tilted her head slightly, the same small gesture she'd made looking at your own shorter dress weeks earlier, a gesture that seemed to say she was still deciding how she felt about all of it. You found yourself, standing between the two groups that afternoon, feeling neither entirely part of the older generation's careful formality, nor entirely at ease with the younger cousin's loud, unself-conscious energy. It occurred to you that you occupy an odd in-between position in this whole quiet earthquake, old enough to remember clearly what came before, young enough to feel the pull of what's arriving now, caught on a fault line that seems to run straight through your own closet, your own habits, your own sense of what feels natural to wear on an ordinary day. You thought about the word youthquake again, turning it over the way you might turn over any new idea, testing whether it fit what you were watching unfold in your own family's living room. It felt right in a way you hadn't expected, the sense that something large and slightly seismic really was happening, not through any single dramatic event, but through countless small decisions made by countless young women, all deciding more or less simultaneously that they didn't need to wait for permission anymore. Later that evening, helping your mother clear the dishes, you asked her directly what she thought of it all, the shorter skirts, the shorter hair, the whole shifting landscape of what young women considered normal now. She paused for a long moment, drying a plate slowly before admitting that she didn't entirely understand it, but that she'd noticed too how quickly everything seemed to be moving, faster than any change she remembered from her own younger years. She told you a little wistfully that her own generation had waited through a war before anyone dared change very much at all, that patience had simply been the expectation, the unquestioned cost of being a woman in her particular decade. She said she wasn't sure whether she envied the younger cousins their easy confidence, or simply found it a little exhausting to imagine keeping up with a world that seemed to be reinventing itself every single season now. You thought about her words walking home that evening, turning the phrase youthquake over once more in your mind, wondering how it might read in a magazine 10 years from now, whether it would be remembered as an accurate description of an actual earthquake, or whether it would simply be one of many phrases people used, briefly and imperfectly, to describe a change too large and too gradual to ever be captured cleanly in a single word. You decided, by the time you reached your own front door, that it didn't much matter what the phrase was called, only that you could feel it, clearly now, in your own family's living room, in your own closet, in the small, persistent gap widening gently between your mother's careful world and whatever new world your younger cousins were already, unself-consciously, beginning to build. It is a quiet evening, and you are curled up with the mail-order catalogue that arrives every season, flipping through pages of models in clothes that seem to belong to an entirely different decade than the one your mother grew up in. You circle a few items in pencil, imagining them arriving at your door in a box, another small piece of this new world delivered right to your porch. There is something almost thrilling about ordering fashion sight unseen, trusting that the picture on the page will match the reality in the package. The lamp beside your chair casts its familiar warm circle of light across the glossy pages, the house quiet around you except for the soft tick of the clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling for the night. You've had this same ritual for years, the seasonal catalogue arriving in the mailbox and finding its way to your lap within a day or two, but tonight the pages feel different somehow, filled with clothes that would have seemed almost unrecognisable in last year's edition. You turn past pages of coats and gloves, pausing on a spread of dresses in bold, geometric prints, not unlike the one hanging in your own closet now, models posed at angles that feel more dynamic than the careful, static poses you remember from catalogues only a few seasons back. Their hair is cropped short in that same clean, architectural style you saw at the salon. Their expressions bright and slightly playful rather than the serene, composed look catalogue models used to favour. You reach for the pencil kept in the drawer of your side table, the same one you use every season to mark items you might consider ordering, and circle a dress near the top of the page, a simple shift in a shade of green you don't yet own, paired in the photograph with a pair of boots, not unlike the ones you bought at the shoe department weeks earlier. You study the price printed beside it, doing the small mental calculation you always do before committing pencil to paper, deciding whether the cost fits comfortably within what you've set aside this month. You flip further into the catalogue, finding a section devoted entirely to what the copy calls the new younger look, an entire spread of clothes clearly aimed at customers exactly your age. Phrases like fresh and modern and unmistakably today scattered across the page in bold lettering. You think about how strange it is that the catalogue itself seems to have noticed the same shift you've been noticing all around you, translating it into merchandise and marketing copy within the space of a single season. You circle 2 more items, a blouse in a soft, unexpected coral not unlike the one you wore to the office recently, and a simple pair of trousers that remind you of the ones you saw on your cousin's campus, comfortable and unapologetic in a way that would have seemed entirely out of place in a catalogue from just a few years back. You imagine wearing the trousers to the market, wondering whether your neighbours would react the way your aunt reacted to the miniskirt, or whether by now even trousers have started to seem less remarkable than they once were. Your husband glances over from his own reading in the next chair, noticing the pencil marks accumulating across the pages, and asks with mild curiosity how much you're planning to order this season. You tell him it's mostly just looking for now, though you both know from experience that looking rarely stays separate from ordering for very long. He returns to his own page with a small, knowing smile. Familiar with this particular ritual by now, you continue through the catalogue, pausing occasionally to study a photograph more closely, checking the model's poses for clues about how a particular garment might actually move, trying to imagine the fabric's weight and texture from nothing more than a printed photograph and a brief paragraph of description. It occurs to you how much trust this whole process requires, ordering something you can't touch or try on, waiting days or weeks for a box to arrive that will either confirm or disappoint the picture you've built in your mind. By the time you reach the final pages, you've circled 6 items in total, more than you usually allow yourself in a single season, though you tell yourself you'll narrow the list down before actually filling out the order form. You set the catalogue aside on the table, the pencil resting in the crease of the pages you'll return to tomorrow, and glance toward the window where the evening has settled fully into darkness now. The house quiet, the ordinary rhythm of your evening continuing exactly as it always has, even as the clothes you're considering feel further and further from anything your mother's own catalogues ever offered her. You think, turning off the lamp at last, about the box that will eventually arrive at your door, carrying whichever of these 6 items you finally decide to keep. Another small, quiet delivery of this rapidly shifting decade, arriving right on your own porch, waiting to be unwrapped. Let's linger for a moment at the fabric counter, where the bolts of cloth feel different under your hand than they used to, cool and slightly slick instead of the familiar texture of cotton and wool. The saleswoman explains this is a new synthetic blend, easier to care for, holds its colour longer, wrinkles less on a long day. You're not sure yet whether you trust it completely, but you buy a length anyway, curious what kind of dress this strange new material wants to become. The fabric counter stretches the length of the store's back wall, bolts stacked in neat, colourful rows, and you move slowly along it the way you always have, running your fingers across each texture as you pass, feeling for the familiar weight and grain of the materials you've worked with for years. But today, several of the newer bolts catch your attention immediately, their surfaces smoother, almost glossy, catching the overhead lights in a way that cotton and wool never quite manage. You pause at one bolt in particular, a deep, saturated blue that seems to shimmer faintly even lying still on the shelf, and reach out to touch it, surprised by how cool it feels beneath your fingers, almost like touching water rather than fabric. The saleswoman notices your interest and comes over, unrolling a small length for you to examine more closely, explaining with evident enthusiasm that this particular blend combines a synthetic fibre with just enough natural material to keep it comfortable against the skin. She tells you the colour will hold beautifully through repeated washing, unlike the cottons you're used to that inevitably fade after enough seasons in the sun, and that the fabric resists wrinkles in a way that seems almost magical compared to anything you've sewn with before. She demonstrates by crumpling a small section of the sample in her fist, then releasing it, and you watch, genuinely startled, as the fabric springs back into a smooth, unwrinkled surface within moments. You think of your own closet, the cotton dresses that always need careful ironing after they've been worn, the wool skirts that require such particular care in washing and storage to avoid shrinking or losing their shape. This new fabric seems to promise an end to all of that fussing, a material that simply takes care of itself in ways cotton and wool never have, though something about its very ease makes you slightly suspicious, as though convenience this complete must come with some hidden cost you haven't yet discovered. The saleswoman explains that the fabric is manufactured rather than grown, produced in factories through chemical processes rather than harvested from fields the way cotton has always been, or sheared and spun the way wool has always been made. You find this fact strange to consider, standing there with the length of it draped over your hand, a fabric with no farm, No field, no animal anywhere in its history, created instead from something closer to what goes into the plastic containers in your own kitchen. You ask her what kind of dress she'd recommend for a fabric like this, and she suggests something simple, a straight, unfussy shift that lets the fabric's slight sheen do the work, rather than fighting it with too many seams or gathers. You think of the mod print dress hanging in your closet already, made from a similar synthetic blend, remembering how oddly weightless it felt compared to your older, heavier clothes, how differently it moved when you walked. You decide to buy a length in the deep blue, along with a smaller cut in a soft pale grey the saleswoman recommends as well, telling you it photographs beautifully and would suit either daytime or evening depending on how it's styled. She measures out the fabric carefully against the counter's built-in yardstick, cutting each length with quick practice scissors, folding them neatly before wrapping them in brown paper for you to carry home. Walking out of the store, the 2 parcels tucked under your arm, you think about the strange, quiet leap of faith involved in buying fabric like this. Material with no long history in your family's sewing tradition, nothing your mother or grandmother ever worked with, nothing you have any real instinct for yet in terms of how it will behave once cut and stitched into an actual garment. You'll have to learn its particular quirks the way you learned cotton's quirks years ago, through trial and likely a little error. You think too about how strange it will feel explaining this new fabric to your mother, watching her run her own fingers across it, with the same suspicious curiosity you felt at the counter today, wondering whether she'll trust it any more than you initially did, or whether she'll simply add it to the long growing list of things this decade keeps asking her to reconsider. It is late afternoon, and you're standing in front of the mirror in your bedroom, your mother's reflection appearing briefly beside yours as she walks past the doorway. She pauses, looks at what you're wearing and says nothing, though her face says quite a lot. You do not feel the need to defend the outfit the way you might have a year ago. You simply hold her gaze for a moment. 2 women from 2 different decades, standing in the same small room, both a little unsure what to make of the other. The late afternoon light falls in long, warm bands across your bedroom floor, catching the dust in the air the way it always does at this particular hour, and you've been standing in front of the mirror longer than you meant to, adjusting the new dress you bought at the boutique weeks ago, the one with the bold, unapologetic print. You turn slightly side to side, checking the hemline, checking how the fabric falls across your shoulders, still not entirely used to seeing yourself dressed quite this way. Your mother's footsteps pause in the hallway just outside your door, and you catch her reflection joining yours in the mirror before you even turn to look at her directly. Her own familiar structured silhouette appearing suddenly beside the newer, bolder one you've been studying. She doesn't say anything at first, just stands there in the doorway, taking in the full effect of the dress, the shorter hemline, the pattern loud enough to be seen from across the room. You remember, watching her face in the mirror, all the other moments this year when she's paused just like this, the shortened skirt she noticed weeks ago, the pale lipstick she asked about at breakfast one morning, each time responding with that same small, unreadable expression. Not quite disapproval, not quite acceptance, something suspended carefully in between the two. You used to feel a small flare of defensiveness in these moments, ready to explain yourself, to justify the choice before she could fully voice whatever hesitation was forming behind her eyes. Today, though, you find yourself simply standing there, meeting her gaze in the mirror without the urge to explain anything at all. It isn't defiance exactly, nothing so dramatic as that, just a quiet, settled comfort in your own reflection that wasn't quite there a year ago, back when every new hemline or every new colour still felt like something you had to defend, even to yourself. She steps into the room a little further, studying the dress more closely now. reaching out briefly to touch the fabric at your sleeve the way she might examine any new piece of clothing, assessing its quality out of old habit, even as her expression suggests she's still working out what she thinks of the pattern itself. "You wore something like this to your cousin's college, didn't you?" she says finally. Not quite a question, more an observation stitched together from small details she's noticed accumulating over recent months. You nod, and she considers this for a moment, her eyes drifting from the dress to your face and back again, as though trying to reconcile the daughter she remembers dressing in careful, structured clothes only a few years back with the woman standing in front of her now, wearing a hemline and a pattern that would have seemed almost impossible in that same closet not so long ago. "I suppose it suits you," she says eventually, in a tone that isn't quite approval, but isn't quite reluctance either. Something new she seems to be trying on herself, testing the words the way you might test an unfamiliar dress. You thank her, and for a moment neither of you says anything further, both studying the shared reflection in the mirror. Two women from two clearly different decades standing side by side in the same soft afternoon light. You notice how different your silhouettes look next to each other. Hers structured and familiar, yours looser and bolder, and yet there's something almost tender in the sight of the two reflections together, evidence not of a rift exactly, but simply of time continuing to move the way it always has, carrying each generation along in its own particular current. She reaches out once more, this time smoothing a small wrinkle from your shoulder, an old automatic gesture from years of helping you dress as a child, and the familiarity of the movement even now, even with a dress she barely recognizes as proper, catches you somewhere soft in your chest. She doesn't say anything else about the dress after that, just turns to continue on toward her own room, leaving you standing there a moment longer, studying your own reflection now that hers has stepped away. You think, watching yourself in the quiet, empty mirror, about how much has shifted this year, not in any single dramatic moment, but in this same slow, cumulative pattern. One hemline, one haircut, one small comment absorbed and considered, and eventually, quietly, accepted. You suspect, turning finally away from the mirror yourself, that this same scene will repeat itself in reverse someday. Some daughter of your own standing in this exact spot, wearing something that startles you in turn, and you find, oddly, that the thought doesn't trouble you nearly as much as you might have expected. Let's end where we began, standing once more in front of your closet, though it looks nothing like it did at the start of the decade. The structured pieces are still there, tucked toward the back, worn less often now but not entirely abandoned. In front of them hang the newer things, the shorter skirts, the bold prints, the boots that would have scandalized your mother's whole bridge club. You close the closet door slowly, aware that somewhere in these few short years, without ever quite meaning to, you became someone your younger self would not have recognized, and someone your future self will look back on with a strange, quiet fondness. You stand there for a long moment before closing the door, letting your eyes travel slowly across the whole arrangement, the way you might read a diary you'd forgotten you'd kept, each garment marking some small, specific memory from the years just past. The structured wool suit at the very back, barely touched now, still carries the faint scent of the perfume you used to wear before you switched, without quite noticing the switch happening, to something lighter and less insistent. Beside it hangs the miniskirt you tried on in secret that first afternoon, heart pounding, door locked, terrified someone might catch you admiring your own legs in the mirror. You smile faintly, remembering how enormous that moment felt at the time, how it seemed to require courage simply to walk 4 blocks to the drugstore and back in something so short. It hardly registers as daring to you now, hanging there quietly among so many other bolder things that arrived after it. Further along, the mod print dress catches the light, black and white geometry that once felt almost too loud to actually wear outside your own bedroom. You remember standing in front of this same mirror, testing whether the pattern felt like it belonged to you, or whether you were simply borrowing it for an evening, uncertain yet whether you'd grow into it or eventually grow out of it. It has become, somewhere along the way, one of your most reliably worn pieces, no longer loud at all, simply familiar now, simply yours. The paper dress isn't here, of course, discarded months ago the way it was always meant to be, but you remember it fondly nonetheless. Remember touching the strange, rustling fabric at that party. Remember your own astonishment at the idea that clothing could simply exist for a season and then vanish without any guilt attached to its disappearing. You wonder sometimes whether that idea changed something in you too, some quiet loosening of your grip on permanence that extends now beyond just clothing. Your go-go boots sit near the bottom of the closet, scuffed now from regular wear, no longer gleaming quite the way they did in the department store display, but broken in comfortably, familiar against your feet in a way the stiff, sensible pumps from your mother's era never quite managed to become. You think of the saleswoman's knowing smile that day, certain you'd walk out wearing them, and you smile now, remembering how right she turned out to be. You reach out and touch the sleeve of your mother's old gift, a fitted blouse she gave you years ago, still hanging faithfully near the back where the more structured pieces live, worn occasionally still for family dinners, for the moments when the newer clothes feel slightly too bold for the room you're walking into. You think of her own closet, still largely unchanged, still filled with the same careful, structured pieces she's always trusted, and you feel, standing here, a small, tender ache at how differently the two of you have each moved through these same few years. You think about the woman you were standing in front of this same closet at the very start, uncertain, testing everything carefully, glancing over your shoulder before wearing anything too bold out into the world. You think about the woman standing here now, easier in her own skin somehow, less anxious about each new choice, having absorbed so many small cumulative changes that the whole idea of daring has quietly redefined itself along the way. You wonder, closing the closet door at last, what your own daughter might think, years from now, standing in this same spot, inheriting whatever pieces of this decade survive long enough to be handed down. You wonder whether she'll find the miniskirt almost quaint by then, whether the go-go boots will seem as dated to her as your mother's structured suits seemed to you at the very start of all this. You turn away from the closet and glance once more around your bedroom, settled now into early evening light, the whole room quietly holding the accumulated evidence of everything you've tried and kept and occasionally discarded these past few years. It occurs to you, turning off the lamp at last, that revolutions rarely announce themselves the way you might expect, not with fanfare, not with a single decisive moment, but exactly like this, quietly, one dress at a time, until one evening you close a closet door and realise, with a small, warm surprise, just how far you've come. So that is the closet, and the decade, and all the small, quiet earthquakes that move through it one hemline at a time, a shorter skirt, a cropped haircut, a synthetic fabric that did not need ironing. None of it announced itself as history while it was happening. It just felt like getting dressed in the morning, like standing in front of a mirror trying to decide who you were allowed to be that day. Think, for a moment, about the women who lived through this quietly, the ones who never made the magazines, who simply stood in their own bedrooms working up the nerve to try something new, or who stood just as firmly in the doorway, watching their daughters change, unsure what to make of it, but loving them anyway. Think of the mothers who kept sewing long after the machines went quiet in other houses, and the daughters who bought their first ready-made dress with hands that trembled just slightly at the register. There was no right side of that gap. There was only two generations doing their best in the same soft afternoon light. So tonight, as you settle in, think about what it might mean to notice your own closet the way she finally noticed hers. not to judge it, only to see it, to remember that even the smallest choices, what you wear, how you cut your hair, how you let yourself be seen, carry a little more weight than they seem to at the time. History is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a mirror, and a mother in a doorway, and a daughter learning slowly to hold her own reflection without flinching, and that was enough. It always was. Good night. Rest well, and let tomorrow arrive gently.